Well, everyone, welcome to my brand new podcast, The Heart Speaks. This is going to be really fun. The Heart Speaks will be a curation of interviews with brilliant philosophers, artists, writers, and academics who have made a profound impact in the world around us. You're going to be able to discover great insights from the world of art, creativity, philosophy, and culture with amazing perspectives from the world's sharpest minds. Now, for this first episode, I sit down with Scott Barry Kaufman, a humanist psychologist and author of the book Transcend, The Science of Self-actualization. In this episode, we discuss what each of us as human beings need in life to operate from what Scott calls the being mode. This is a higher mode where we feel free and unburdened by our anxieties and insecurities. It's a kind of existence where we're not projecting those insecurities onto others, but operating from a place of openness and curiosity. We also talk about the challenge of psychological entropy that affects us all, and what happens when we as human beings act from a place of deficiency and a place of scarcity. Scott gives us some tools we can use to overcome those states when we find ourselves falling into despair. Now, because this episode is one of our earlier episodes, there may be a few odd places where the quality isn't the best, but it's still an incredible episode, and I encourage you to watch, share with all your friends, and enjoy. All right, that's all for me for now. Enjoy the episode. All right, let's do this. How are you, Scott?
Jump right in. Yeah, I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. How have you been these days? What's the last year been like for you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm trying to make lemons out of lemonade, and it's good. It's good. I started my own center. It's called the Center for the Science of Human Potential, and I'm doing like coaching certification program, a self-actualization coaching program, and
Whoa.
classes, and yeah, I'm just kind of creating my life in a way that I didn't expect. I quit my job at Columbia for now, so.
Nice.
uh, It's actually nice not being academia. It's actually
Yeah,
nice. How have you been?
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a big excitement. How have you been? How have you been?
I've been good. I've been building Theory of Enchantment, and
I see.
it's crazy how many iterations and permutations that whole thing has manifested and emerged, and it's still going.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to bring that, as a relational practice to as many organizations as possible. And hopefully this new podcast called The
Yeah.
Heart Speaks can be in service of that as well. So I've been good. I've been just enjoying the ride.
Well, huge congrats. Yeah, to the
Thank you.
podcast and as well as your company. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Thank you. I'm curious, what's it like to create a certification process? What is that entire experience like?
Are we officially be like starting the interview?
Yeah. I'm just going with it, going with the flow.
I love it. I love it. So this is being recorded. Like this is not
Yeah, this
live,
is
but
live. We're live.
it's hot. It's
It's
hot.
hot. Let's go.
um, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm really excited about this self-actualization coaching certification program because there are lots of different kinds of coaching programs out there, and there's like executive coaching, and there's personal coaching and leadership coaching and mindset coaching. It feels like everyone has their own coaching practice these days.
Yeah.
So why not me? No, but I felt like no, that's not the main reason why I started this, but I started this because I did see a gap in the coaching literature. So I want to create a kind of coaching called self-actualization coaching, which is specifically tied to humanistic psychology and brings in positive psychology as well. But it's really about helping people create and design a life that works best for them, and being able to really look into their strengths using the tools of science and looking into their, like their character, not only their character strengths, but their talents and their forms of creativity, and with zero judgment from the coach, zero, very like Carl Rogers, unconditional positive regard, work with the client to design a life that works for them and with no apology. So this is something we're building up. I have a team of coaches that have a lot of experience in the coaching world, but really want to work with me to adapt this to this kind of self-actualization coaching format.
And is that kind of a model one of the characteristics of humanistic psychology? Like, how would you define humanistic psychology?
Yeah, I see humanistic psychology as an interest in the psychology of the whole person, and how a human with so many competing parts, that through the course of human evolution, this is just how we evolved. Like we can't help it. No one's above this. Anyone who claims I'm above it is lying to you.
Either they're lying or they're like the Buddha, both of which are, interesting.
That's true. That's a good point. I don't think the Buddha or like, I don't know how much the Dalai Lama lies. I think he probably doesn't lie about his saintliness, but I would imagine that he has some of the very same impulses that the rest of us have. What he has reached is a high level of integration. And so humanistic psychology is interested in the integration, so you can feel like comfortable in your own skin, that you feel alive, you feel vital, you feel like you're a whole harmonious self-actualized human that's operating at your full capacity.
And how is that distinctive from some of the other forms of psychology that are out there? Are there other forms that just don't focus on the full human, that focus on parts? Is that the distinction?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the field of psychology is quite fabricated, actually. Like cognitive neuroscientists will pick their favorite brain area that they'll spend their entire dissertation studying. I'm the BA10 guy. The BA10, that's metacognitive area. Or someone's like the visual cortex, occipital lobe, and that's what they focus on. And even developmental psychology, they'll focus on specific ages, and you can go down the line, and look at different fields. And it seems to, clinical psychology, people pick their own specialization, and even positive psychology, which is the one closest linked to humanistic, I would say. Positive psychology tends to focus on still, I would argue, a specific slice of humans, like life satisfaction, or even well-being, or even meaning. Even if you pick meaning, that's still one slice of yourself. I'm really interested I'm interested in the dark side too, like I study that, I created this Star Wars test on my website that anyone can take, and it'll say where you are on the force, by assessing, multiple aspects of you.
That's cool. I want to take that. Star Wars is one of my favorite series, so I appreciate that.
Cool. Me too.
How do you feel? You said you wanted to explore the darkness also. How do you feel about Carl Jung? How does he have any meaning or presence in your life as a humanist psychologist? Because I'm deeply moved and inspired by his work, but I'd be curious to get your take on him.
Yeah, I am deeply moved and inspired by his work as well. I find he was a much needed corrective to Freud, added the spiritual dimension, which was completely lacking in Freud. Come on, Freud didn't seem to have a spiritual bone in his body. Maybe he did personally, but interestingly, in his theories, he reduced everything to destructive or sexual impulses. For most of his life. Towards the end of his life, he kind of saw, as everyone does, as they get older, they get more spiritual. It's just like everyone, that happens to everyone. But Carl Jung really was an important corrective, and I would say is still relevant today in bringing the intuitive dimension. That's what I particularly liked about his work, was bringing the experiential dimension to the table. And he had something called depth psychology, which I think we need to bring back as well. Depth psychology is very a good bedfellow with a humanistic psychology, because we want to really go deeper than the surface level of a human. We want to go to the deepest level possible to really understand the full nature of a human.
So this is interesting. So I've started recently becoming a fan of Taoist philosophy. And
nice.
I follow John Vervaeke, a cognitive scientist out of the University of Toronto, who's done a lot of meditation practices and things like that. And combining the two, one of the things that I've come to, I guess, realize or believe is in this idea of the inexhaustibility of the human being. This idea in Taoism, which says that you can't ever pin a human being down. You can't ever fully, figure out the ground or the actual totality of a human being, because it's always inexhaustible. It's always the next level and the next level and the next level. And I think this speaks to your whole idea of transcendence, which I want to talk about. But I'm curious to get your take. Like, how does that play a role in the way you approach psychology at all?
Which aspect in particular, the sort of contemplative meditative aspect?
You said that you're interested in getting to the fullness of the human being. I guess my question is it actually even possible to ever get to the fullness of the human being if you believe that we're inexhaustible ultimately?
That's a really interesting question. So what would it mean? What does it mean practically to be so there's never any complete same with self-actualization. No one ever is 100% self-actualized. I would argue that self-actualization is not a destination, but so same thing with depth psychology. We can grow in the direction that we most want to grow in. We can keep plumbing the depths. But yeah, we will never, it isn't inexhaustible. Yeah, we never will fully understand ourselves. I've given up the project of fully understanding myself. I mean, I still 4 or 5 times a day do something. I'm like, why the fuck did I just do that?
Yeah, same.
So I mean, I give up that project. But to the extent which we can intentionally use our consciousness to error correct and make choices, I think there is a kind of free will worth wanting, so to speak. We don't need to get into that whole debate, but there's a little wiggle room there
to get into that debate.
But I do believe that there's to a certain extent, we can make intentional choices that can direct us can move us in the direction of the growth that we most, the whole organism wants, not just one part of us.
Very beautiful. I love that approach, because it's not disjointed, right? It's not like a dichotomous approach. It's a holistic approach. I want to dive into talking a bit more about your book, Transcend. I've read it a few years ago. I re-skimmed it for the purposes of this conversation. And awesome. I also reference it from time to time when I'm speaking to people about this holistic approach to understanding human beings. You talk about how human beings can act out of scarcity. And when we act out of scarcity, I think you say Abraham Maslow called it deficiency needs or D needs, when we're acting out of a place of scarcity and zero-sum ways of thinking. My question for you, and I don't know if this is a thing yet that has yet to be discovered, but maybe it is. My question is, what advice or what set of practices would you give to someone who is experiencing a scarcity latent context live? Like, what are the tools that they can actually enact immediately in that moment to sort of get themselves out of that scarcity mindset? So I'll just give you a quick example. I volunteer at an organization called Children of Promise in Brooklyn. Children of Promise is an organization that mentors kids whose parents are incarcerated. So imagine if you're a young kid and you're growing up without your mother or your father in the home. You're thinking to yourself that it's your fault, right? Like you're thinking to yourself that, like, why did my parent leave me? Because you're young and you're impressionable and you don't know any better. So what's like a mindset or a way of getting into another mindset that young kid or any person in this similar kind of situation can like switch to immediately? Or are there a set of practices that a person can sort of embody to like help get them out of that way of thinking?
It's a good question. There's an emotion. I'm trying to look up what the name of it is. It's called Kama Muta. Have you heard of Kama Muta? Kamamuta. I've been. It's even though I couldn't remember the name of it. It's the sudden feeling of oneness with others means, and I've been really psychologically trying to look at interventions to move the dial on that, and other researchers have as well, and linking it to a topic I'm become interested in recently, which is group narcissism. Something I'm really interested in, and how we can lower group narcissism by increasing this emotion. And this is an emotion that we can snap into at any moment, I believe. It's a matter of shifting our frame of mind, shifting how we, like when we're in the presence of someone else, moving from that sort of division between us, like identities dividing us, or skin colors dividing us, or a million things that can divide us, and shifting from that mindset into a common humanity mindset. And if you can shift in that mindset, there's this feeling that can happen with a person where you feel a sudden sense of oneness with the person, and it has certain physiological manifestations which are so interesting. And I'm sure you've experienced this many times in your life, where you almost feel tearful. You feel like your heart feels really open. You feel there's, like, psychologists have identified there's a whole like list of things that seem to come right, and it can happen suddenly. So I thought of this because you asked me, is there something you can do live on the spot? How can we cultivate more of this particular kind of emotion in daily interactions?
Yeah.
That'd be huge. That'd be
Massive.
huge. Yeah, that'd be massive. Well, some interventions people have been trying have been, unsurprisingly, mindfulness. So a 10-minute mindfulness exercise where you practice a sense of existential gratitude, or just being happy you're alive, and that you're human, and that you have just having gratitude for just being able to talk to other people, other humans. When you're dead, you're not going to have that opportunity, so why would you waste your whole life fighting with people when you've been given a special gift of being able to actually have this oneness feeling with others? Why waste time on this earth when you can have that?
I do wonder, though, bringing into sort of the developmental psychology that you mentioned earlier, how it's like based upon different ages, right? Like at what age do you sort of start to have the capacity to do these things? I feel like, and I'm especially interested in the youth because they are our future, obviously. Like when you're young and you're not even necessarily riddled or engaged by, like, social media, culture wars and things of that nature, but like you're dealing with intimate, family oriented problems, and you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you haven't had exposure to a lot of the things that you're talking about, if there's this great scene in The Equalizer 2, where Denzel Washington is mentoring this young kid who is susceptible to joining a gang. And basically what he tells him is, you have no idea what death is, right? He's sort of this kid is being very reckless with his life, but he's being reckless because he actually doesn't know. Like he can't fully comprehend. And I'm sure adults can't either, but obviously, like, there are different moments in your life when you can conceptualize things in a more profound way. So I'm wondering do you think it's harder for young people, for like teenagers, for example, to tap into some of these things just because their brains aren't fully developed, they may not have been exposed? What kind of advice would you offer young people?
Yeah, I mean, we're both interested in education and self-actualizing students. This is similar. We're on a lot of similar frequencies. Yeah. So that's for sure. And I think part of the problem, and I don't think youth can't have it, but the barrier to it in youth tends to be that, and I'm gonna kind of put it this way: the more that one develops a comfort in their own skin, the more they tend to focus on self-actualization aspects of their life. And I feel like when you're a kid, you feel awkward, especially a teenager. You feel awkward, clunky. You don't know your place in the world yet. You're struggling to find an identity that fits you. And you may try many things, that then later on in your life you regret. You regret that you tried that one on, and you're like, oh my God, I don't tell anyone about that identity I tried on. I mean, I know, I certainly did. So I think that if I'm trying to talk to young people, inspire them, I really, or even coach them. And I think these kids need to be coached. And that's why I really love the Future Project, this organization I work with, where each young person is paired with their own personal coach, that's called a future coach, to help them realize their future. Yeah. Have you heard of the Future Project?
I
Have you heard of
haven't.
that?
I mean, I've heard of future authoring, but that's like an exercise
Mm.
that I know Jordan Peterson created, but I'm not familiar with this
Oh yeah,
organization.
that's different.
Yeah.
It's very different.
Yeah.
So the future organization, like a future coach in every school, the office of the dream director, and any student can go into the office of the dream director and talk about their dreams, goals, desires. I think the more that we can get students really getting in touch with their future self, not their current self. See, the more that
Yeah.
teenagers are in touch with their current self, the more awkward they're going to feel.
Oh yeah,
The more,
that's true.
the more sort of clunky and insecure, and to get out of this kind of insecurity trap, to get out of it, it's really a matter of getting in touch with your own unique, real felt values and dreams and desires and talents, and projects, getting them involved in creative projects, getting them in the flow state. The more you can get students in the flow state, the more that all these other trivial concerns tend to disappear, the more comfortable they tend to be in their own skin, the more they get into the being realm of human existence, which I and Maslow contrasted from the deficiency realm. So deficiency realm, you're not really pure being, but if you can get into a pure being realm, that's what we all really want at the end of the day, even if we don't know it.
Do you think that there's some elements of our society that don't encourage us to get into the being realm?
Oh yeah.
And what are those? Because I feel like we're conditioned to not strive for that being realm.
Who's we? Who's we?
That's a good question. Yeah, let me not generalize here. No, I mean like the culture that, let's say Western culture. Yeah, let's say American culture specifically. Yeah.
I think that there are just so many subcultures. So much of it depends. Well, what subcultures do you spend most of your time? Where are you working all day? I think it's very easy to generalize and think that like Twitter is real life, that like everyone who's concerned about certain issues on your Twitter feed, when you step outside your apartment, everyone on the street is going to care about the same things, I think we can get kind of stuck in that way. So I think another part of out of this trap in the road is recognizing that I think a lot more people are living in the being realm in their daily life than we realize, or even give it credit. I think it's very easy to just generalize and say, American culture, we're all in this deficiency realm. But even when you go into those where they're environmentally deficient in really meaningful ways, you can find pockets of real sense of community. You can find pockets of real loyalty and brotherly love, especially in Philadelphia, where I'm from. But no. So I do think that it's important to recognize that yes, there are lots of forces that are pulling us into the deficiency realm all over the place. But I think to a certain extent, we can design our life and our focus to be and surround environments and people that get us more in the being realm. I mean, Maslow had a whole list of exercises. He called them be exercises, the being. And it's in my book, Transcend. I could pull it out, but there's all these exercises to intentionally, like get out into nature more, like get out and, there are things that you can do, like approach a fellow human with just curiosity, with no preconception, that immediately will snap you in the being realm. You're out of the deficiency realm when you're doing that, right? So yeah, there are lots of things we can do to arrange our lives in a way that gets us more regularly in the being realm.
So I have two questions about the being realm as you've described it just now. The first is, given that what you're doing is very much tailored to every person, and given the inexhaustibleness of every person, that makes sense. But do you think it's scalable? And I ask that because I feel like we need it to be scalable to make that evolutionarily leap as a society. So is it scalable, number one, and what are some ideas you have on that? And number two, what is the role that community plays in sustaining that being mode? Because, I know for myself personally, right, that like I can be walking down the street in New York City and not feeling good about myself, and then projecting my my insecurities onto other people, and so that will make me less likely to go up to a person and engage them out of curiosity. But if I was in a community of practice where everyone was challenging themselves to do that, I would
Yeah.
feel far more motivated to go out there and support it, quite frankly. So what is the role that community plays in maintaining the being mode, and how can we scale this new way of living?
Yeah, I'm going to tackle the easier one first, the second one. Community is essential in your immediate environment. There's actually three different meanings of the word meaning
Okay.
in the psychological literature. One is kind of this purpose kind of meaning, like I have this grandiose purpose. Another one is coherence, which is just in my immediate environment, do things make sense? Do I feel safe? Is there some predictability? Do I know when I'm getting my next meal? You know, and there's something called psychological entropy, that we can enter the state of psychological entropy when there's too much unknowns in our immediate environment. We feel unsafe, and when we're pitched into that state, our mind has a very specific color. Well, the world has a specific color to it. I liken it to the experience, the feeling I felt, quite frankly, back in my 20s when I used to go to dance clubs. And do you know the feeling where you like, if you approach someone you find cute, whatever, and they reject you,
Yeah.
suddenly the whole room has a certain color to it, where you don't feel
Mhm.
safe. You don't feel like it's a friendly environment. You feel like a loser.
Yeah.
You get pitched into this complete state of, like, the whole world is colored by it now, and what that does is that creates a feedback loop, that it makes it more likely that the next person you approach is going to be even more likely to reject you, because you're coming across as
That's the way you
weird. So that's just my, like, real concrete, example. But they've done studies where they brought a set of researchers into a poor neighborhood that particularly people in the neighborhood didn't have trust for each other, and trust is a huge one here. And they had researchers only there for 15 minutes, and they had a van where they could bail at any time if they wanted to get out of the neighborhood. And
Oh wow.
the researchers went door to door, kind of asking if they could put up flyers. And they found among the researchers, that even though they didn't live in these neighborhoods, even 15 minutes in these neighborhoods showed a plummeting of their trust in the world more generally, and as well in the environment than measured pretest, than when they came in it. So can you imagine what it's like living day after day? I mean, if just 15 minutes can alter your view, your worldview that much, can you imagine day after day? So there are some real, I mean, dare I say, there are some real systemic changes that need to be made, right? You can't, in tackling this issue that we're talking about right now, you can't just completely ignore, more systematic, large scale environmental changes that make people feel a sense of trust, make them feel like, safe, right? So that's super, super important. But I do think there are certain things, mindset changes as well. I know both me and you really believe in the power of the mind, to put it, I don't know, put it cornily maybe. Yeah. So I think that you also can train your mind in various ways. But when your environment keeps just bumping up against unsafe, at a certain point you do get pitched into the state of psychological entropy, which has a very distinct brain signature.
Very interesting. Psychological entropy. I will try to remember that phrase.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and any thought? I have a question about that. I'll go back to it. But any thoughts about the challenge of scale, given the magnitude of everything that you just described? Yeah.
Yeah, the scalability question you asked me that's like a really tough one for me to answer pithily, because well, for a number of reasons. One is, I think it's important for one to be have humility. Having humility means just knowing your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
I'm not a policy person like that. I'm a psychologist, I think to address some of these issues to scalable, I do think they're scalable. But I think that requires a real serious policy discussion. That we have to start bringing in distribution of economic resources. We have to bring in discussion. We have to bring in all sorts of things that I am not an expert in, and I'm not trying to claim that I am an expert in.
Yeah.
But I do think there are. I could, at least if I sat down at the table with these policy people, I could outline to them the conditions where people flourish.
For sure.
I could outline to people environments where that are most conducive to self-actualization. I am very interested in what does a self-actualizing society look like, and I can psychologically tell you the elements. But the extent to which it is practically scalable is going to have, at the end of the day, you can't get around it. It's going to come down to politics. It's going to come down to policy. I know, and I don't like that shit. I don't like that shit.
I mean, on the one hand, it's like, whoa, that's again the magnitude. But on the other hand, it's like, whoa, like what an incredible project that requires all of us to, devote ourselves. Like that's an awesome moonshot project to work on.
Yes, I'm also really interested in community actualization, not just self-actualization, but community actualization. And that there are things that communities, even without the role of the government or without the role of policymakers to sort out and get their shit together, there are things that people in communities can decide that there is part of their culture. We've had lots of break-ins recently in where I'm living right now. I've had my electric bike stolen twice in the last 2 weeks. But everyone in the community, we've all like banded together to like fight crime. It's not like I'm in like the ghetto over here, but we've still, the community has decided we're gonna all have each other's backs. And you feel a sense of safety when like everyone kind of comes together and like signals to each other, look, we all have each other's backs, and we don't stand for this crime in this area.
For sure.
So I think there are things that you can do as a community to actualize, that you don't have to wait for. I don't recommend waiting for politicians to get their shit in order before you change your community.
And speaking of which, what would you say, like we talk about psychological entropy on a personal level, on an individual level. Let's turn to social media. Let's turn to platforms like Twitter, which I have a love-hate relationship with. Where are you seeing psychological entropy on platforms such as these, and how can we sort of self-regulate, community regulate, so that we don't fall into that?
Those are two questions. As you know, it's too easy to we make it too easy on social media to respond impulsively and knee-jerk, and also there's reward structures to respond knee-jerk. I can say unequivocally that whatever the word is, that or is it equivocally? I don't know. Whatever the word is, I can say for sure that when I give my hot take on something, like, oh, these woke are annoying, I get 1 million likes, right? But if I'm just like, on the one hand, I think that we should have compassion for all humans, but on the other hand, we must not allow people from our in-group to have moral transgressions, even if people like 4 or 5 likes, right? Yeah. So it's like there's not a reward structure for thoughtfulness, for nuance, for integration, for the things that the society desperately needs right now. And so that is a significant problem. But your second question, what can we do to change the culture? Well, that's not exactly how you phrase it, but I'm going to reframe it a little bit. I think there are things we can do to police it a little more. Not police. I don't even like that word police, but but to change. Can I just say change the culture?
Sure.
And I try, and you're out there doing that every day yourself. Chloe, I see you. But I try. Like, I'll say things like, I tweeted something yesterday. I was like, we need to not be afraid of telling the truth, but in equal measure, we need to not be afraid of showing love. These two are not at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the kind of culture that I want to see. So I think be the culture that you want it to be, and just keep doing it consistently. And some days you'll get no one paying attention, and some days you might get a lot of attention, but you can't do it for the attention,
Right.
day, and you just have to live your values, but you can't do it for the likes. You can't. There are a lot of people they're on Twitter and they say whatever they know will get a lot of likes,
Yeah.
and that's the deficiency motivation, right?
Yeah.
Right, because you're only speaking because of the possibility that you get rewarded with likes. That's not the best, healthiest reason for speaking.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that people probably can recognize when they're experiencing material entropy. So like I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, and but it's harder for people, I imagine, to recognize when they're experiencing psychological entropy, as in, oh, I'm actually just doing this because I want likes. To be able to pause and stop and confront yourself with that kind of radical honesty is something that I've struggled with, that I'm sure others have struggled with. So I think that's one of the challenges. It's like the psychological, spiritual dimension. It's difficult to sense and to intuit when you're in it, and when you are being rewarded for it. It's a kind of a reward that turns against itself. But it may be hard for a person who has 1 million followers to actually recognize that something is off here.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. Here's one just a tip. Don't tweet when you're in certain moods. Simple as that. I can tell you that when I'm feeling, I get in mood sometimes where I feel so insecure, and I just want to go on Twitter and tweet something so that I'll feel better about myself, because people will like what I say. But I can say that in most of the cases when I've done that, what I've had to say, I regret what I said like the next day. It's not coming from my real self.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, whoever. I mean, it's coming from
maybe your higher self. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's no real self. I should be clear. It's all you. It's all you. But and you need to take responsibility for the whole of you. But I do think that it's not the best self. It's not the best. It's not the side of me that I'm most proud of. Then when I look at that tweet the next day, the tweets that I've been most proud of really were the ones that came from a mood and a sort of mental state that I'm in that is not driven by deficiency. Yeah. And I can just say that clearly. I can see that so clearly. Do you see that as well?
So I don't know. I haven't tried practicing tweeting when I'm in a certain mood. I do take 2 breaks off Twitter. So I will just be not on Twitter for 2 weeks. And people will be like, where? And when I come back, people are like, oh, I haven't seen you in a while. And I'm like, yeah, that's because I take 2 weeks off. And I actually find just the entire, I don't know, process or mechanism of checking Twitter, seeing what people like, seeing what people retweet. That is it reminds me of the same process that creates addiction, quite frankly, because it's reciprocal narrowing. I think that's what it's called in some of the psychological literature that I've seen, where when you're in a specific context, there's a study that was done that found that people who are in the Vietnam War were addicted to opioid, I think it was. And they found that once many of those soldiers came back from Vietnam, they were, and put into a different context, they almost immediately like got rid of their addiction. Like they were no longer addicted anymore. And so I find that Twitter can be this kind of environment that just turns on things in my brain that are not necessarily healthy. And when I'm not on Twitter for those 2 weeks, I'm telling you, Scott, it feels totally like the air has cleared. And obviously I want to have some relationship with the platform, but in moderation, because I have noticed that there's like a fog that dissipates when I'm not on Twitter for those 2 weeks.
Even if I just go weekend, I've been starting to have no email on weekends, like no check. I wish I had no email because I don't check email on weekends. There's a difference. I wish you could just cut off the stream, But So if I go a whole weekend without, and I've been doing this recently, I enjoy my weekend.
Yeah,
I enjoy it. I'm not used to that feeling where I'm like enjoying my weekend.
I will say, because I grew up observing Shabbat in some format, I typically don't work. I don't do work from Friday night to Saturday night, so I don't check emails from Friday night to Saturday night. I will check emails on Saturday night and Sunday. Maybe I should extend to include the full weekend. And I'm not there yet. I'm working on it, but I also want to make it so that I'm not checking Twitter or Instagram from Friday night to Saturday night. I give myself an entertainment pass, but that's just me bullshitting myself. So I want to get to the place where I'm not like on those platforms, at least for those 24 hours.
I love that. I must comment. I think you're more Jewish than I am, Chloe.
You're doing the Shabbat thing with the emails, that's basically in the
That's true. The fasting. Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
I want to explore, sort of switching gears. I came across a quote in your book about loneliness, and obviously loneliness can play a role in the psychological. What's the phrase again? Psychological
entropy.
Yeah, that's a great phrase. So you point out in your book that it's a health epidemic, and it can lead to things like heart disease and diabetes, and also can be as deadly as obesity. But it strikes me that all of those diseases are comorbidities for COVID-19. So for COVID, if you have diabetes or heart disease, or you suffer from obesity, you're more likely to suffer from COVID, especially if you're not vaccinated, if you have those preconditions. And yet, at the same time, to protect ourselves from COVID, we have to incur some form of loneliness, right? So last year in 2020, we had to physically separate ourselves, physically disconnect from our loved ones. So this is like a double bind in a way. So like, what advice would you give to people, let's say even to people who are vaccinated but can't see other loved ones who aren't vaccinated? How do you navigate the fact that loneliness can cause and be caused by some of the same illnesses? Like that's such a frustrating paradox,
I hear what you're saying. I think it also is important to recognize that that social isolation is not the same thing as physical isolation.
Okay.
A lot of people. Yeah, I will go on. So, but yeah, so I'm ridiculous. But I feel like I'm cheeky. I do feel like a lot of people assume that if you're living with someone that you're not going to be lonely, right? But the research very clearly shows there's not that strong a relationship between the extent to which you're in physical proximity to people and your sense of loneliness. And you look at New York City as a case in point. How many people in New York City complain they don't have a boyfriend, they don't have a girlfriend? It's so lonely here, and it's like everyone's packed on top of each other in the streets, in New York City. So I think that just having a broader conceptualization of what are the real factors that decrease loneliness, and what it really comes down to is what psychologists call high quality connections, HQCs. And high quality connections have a certain set of characteristics to them, and they can be you can have a high quality connection just through like chatting with someone. I almost said AIM chat, but like that, I'm so I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah.
But chatting, like
texting, you're saying?
That's what I'm trying to say. Oh my gosh, I got stuck in the 90s. My brain just like went to the 90s. Like, what the hell just happened to me? I'm like, I suddenly couldn't think of anything. Like, you don't even know what that means, do you?
I know what it means, but I've never actually done it. So
yeah, you do Facebook messaging, right? But texting, there's a certain high quality connection has a set of characteristics to it, which I think can apply to any kind of format. It could be through Zoom, it could be through anything, and that's that you feel like there's a reciprocal connection going on, that you're not. I do think there's a difference between need for belonging and need for intimacy or a high quality connection. I think they're different things. I think a lot of people strive for what they really want is a high quality connection, but in order to have that need met, they go through the route of belonging and acceptance.
Okay, so can you explain what the difference is between those two?
Absolutely. Well, the need for belonging is just the need to feel accepted, to feel like you're part of something larger than yourself.
Okay.
But the thing is, you can be part of an organization, you can be part of a religion. There are all sorts of ways that people try to satisfy their need for belonging, and you can still feel deeply lonely. Because the point here is your whole self is not accepted. The only part of you that's accepted is the part of you that is accepted by the group.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? You could like belong.
Yeah, of course. That makes total sense to me. Yeah.
And then the second that part of you, let's say, dissents or disagrees, like imagine, you're at a liberal or a conservative meeting, and you're like, hey everyone, this other side of me, my heart is telling me that what you're all saying right now is just really not the way forward here.
Yeah.
They'd be like, you know what, you don't belong to us anymore.
Right.
you don't belong here.
Yeah.
And you'll feel deeply, deeply lonely. The point here is that high quality connections are ones you only need one. Research have found you only need one or two high quality connections in your whole life to have that the loneliness gone. And what we do instead is we do so many other things in our lives trying to satisfy that. Like fame has been found to be, that's like the number one thing people go towards, thinking it'll satisfy it.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that makes it least likely that they'll ever satisfy it. So instead of like shooting for, oh, maybe if I get 500 more likes on Twitter, then I won't feel so lonely.
Yeah.
Seek out a friend who accepts the totality of your being and in which you accept the totality of their being, and text with them more frequently, maybe Zoom with them if you can't see them in person. Do whatever you can to make that, to deepen that relationship. That'll be much more likely to reduce loneliness than all these things we think are going to bring us not having loneliness.
That's a great piece of advice. I had no idea that you only.
Isn't that interesting? Because evolutionary. Well, if you think about it, evolutionary speaking, we grew, we were on in the Savannah desert. Humans were very tribal. We only had a couple people in our clan, and that's all we needed to not feel lonely. Now we live in an artificial world where there are so many potential connections and opportunities to meet people. But honestly, how many of those people do you really want to have a high quality connection with? I mean, I'm whispering this, but honestly, there are millions of people in New York City. Like most of them you meet on the street.
Scott. Careful. New York City is awesome. I will always rep this city.
No, major rep to NYC for sure.
No, but I get what you're saying. Actually, It's interesting. The thing that you just said about fame reminds me of this other quote that I'm going to pull up now from your book, which I was going to ask you about, but it makes perfect sense with the metaphor for fame. You wrote that the quest for power in an attempt to make oneself whole always inevitably makes one want even more power. And one consequence of this is the deep irony that the most powerful people tend to be the loneliest. So I'm not saying that there's a correlation here, because obviously, as you grow on social media in terms of your influence, as I grow on social media in terms of mine, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm more lonely or that you're more lonely. But it does beg the question, is it possible that a lot of followers, or many of the people on social media with a ton of followers, millions of followers, may be more susceptible to feeling lonely because, in fact, it's an indicator of more power, more influence, but that might actually correlate with a greater sense of loneliness.
Yes. And I would even go further. I would say that the more likes you have, if you let it go to your head, the more isolated you'll feel from the rest of humanity. It keeps putting you more and more separated from the rest of humans, and it puts you in a situation. I'll be really personal for a second, and this might sound funny, but I recently started doing things to really kind of start at square zero on. Like I'm trying to get outside my comfort zone and do new things. So one thing I've started to do recently is like stand-up comedy,
Oh,
like
cool.
I've always wanted to do it,
Yeah.
but I'm in this class with like these 20-year-olds, and they don't see me as Scott Barry Kaufman. They're like, who's this schmuck, and who's trying to be funny. And it's so humbling to put yourself in environments where you realize eat all that's still one part of you. Situation where, like you're not great overall.
So what then it becomes the cost of not only these people not winning. So we say a theory of enchantment, right? Like supremacist ways of thinking occur when a person or a group of people is experiencing some kind of deep-seated insecurity or like loss of belonging or negative feelings, and instead of having the right tools to deal with that, they're projecting that onto other people, right, in order to feel secure and safe. And but the challenge, it's such a challenge, is that not only for the people who are suffering in this way, but for other people who mistakenly believe that power is everything, right, who may be, let's say, being persecuted by those people or victimized by those people, right, who may be, let's say, being persecuted by those people or victimized by those people.
I think it's important to ask, what are you trying to get power to do? I think that right now, because I want to be, nuanced here. I think that for a lot of groups and that have significant deprivations in their life, it does make sense to want power in certain regards. If you're because you just want equality, right? You're not trying to you're not saying I want to be better than other groups. That you're just saying, can we just be at the same table?
Yeah.
And I think that's totally reasonable, and it will ultimately lead to greater well-being. You'll have greater well-being when you're at the same table as other people. But the kind of power plays we're seeing is something different. It's not just we want to get the power so that we can have the same place at the table. So what we're seeing now is, I think, something a little bit different. It's not just, and you are still seeing those who have real inequalities, those who have low power, trying to just be and fight to be at the same table as everyone else. But you're also seeing concomitantly a lot of power plays, a lot of different groups that they want something else. They want to be constant. They demand, this is what they're doing. They're demanding not just respect, but they're demanding acknowledgement of their greatness. That's different. That's group narcissism. That's not healthy in-group.
Inflation. It's inflation.
It's the difference between healthy. You can have a healthy self-esteem where you're like, I'm enough, I'm competent, I'm worthy as a human being. Or you can have a narcissistic self-esteem. I'm superior to others. I demand to be special privileges because of my greatness. And you're seeing that now at the group level, and all over the place. My tentative title, which I'm sure will be changed by the Atlantic, is group narcissism is everywhere. That's my title, but they'll probably change that into something else. But do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. When you say that, I think of I'm working on this piece that unpacks some of the psychological dynamics of the Nation of Islam, and unpack and just looking at Malcolm X's life in particular. But I find it so interesting because it falls into what you're saying. What essentially happened was a people who were basically constantly told that their skin color is what made them inferior, created a worldview, constructed a worldview out of a need to defend themselves, which said to them, oh, no, my skin color is not what makes me inferior. It's actually what makes me superior. So it's an inversion of, it's like, it was a response to say that the very thing that you think I am, that you hate me for, is the very thing that is the very reason why God loves me. Right. And this, we can see this across different cultures and different communities, but this is a human nature flip that we do in order to, and it's so, we always talk about like the hatred and the bigotry, which is there, but we never talk enough about the tragedy and the sorrow of that phenomenon. So what you're saying makes perfect sense to me.
And doesn't all this just come back to whether or not you're stemming from the deprivation mode of existence or the growth mode? See, when you're insecure, when you're deeply insecure, which is what we have found in the research, is correlated with the group narcissism. It's not grandiose narcissism, it's vulnerable narcissism, which tends to, there's an interesting dynamic here where in narcissistic groups, the followers tend to be vulnerable narcissists and the leaders tend to be grandiose narcissists.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they have a codependent relationship.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to review what you wrote about the difference between grandiose narcissism and vulnerable narcissism, because that's so interesting. Because now you're getting on a you're breaking it down on a like micro level, even within an organization. That's cool.
Yeah, and you start seeing it everywhere. Once you like realize that's what's going on, you see it in like some of these like really big followers on Twitter. You see all their sycophants, who like if anyone comes from outside and criticizes that person, they're like, don't touch Ben. Like Ben Shapiro has like all these sycophants, right? Like if I'm just like, if I go on like, hey Ben, love what you're up to, just didn't really think that point you made really is backed by science. And I just wanted to give you a study. That's all. Have a great day. His sycophants will be like, you liberal snowflake.
They're like, how dare you?
And that's not a healthy relationship between that person and Ben Shapiro. Do you know what I mean?
By the way, this is a total invitation to Ben to come on the pod.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, Ben. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, this is more shade against Ben's followers than Ben.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Well, we are almost out of time, so I'm going to let you have the last word. Any final advice, words of wisdom that you can send to our listeners to help them on the way to becoming more actualized and transcending themselves and entering into the being mode? Yeah, I would say that it's easier to default to the deprivation mode of human existence. It's very easy for everything to stem from that. But I think the thing that humans evolved is this capacity to override that and to intentionally steer our mind in the direction of the growth of our highest self and our best self, and surround ourselves with the people and environments to the extent that we can that are more likely to get us into that mode of human existence. And I just want people to even just be aware of that so they can try to practice it more in their lives. Yeah. Awesome, Scott. Well, the book is called Transcend, the Science of Self-actualization. It is awesome. Any other websites that you want to plug, or your social media accounts that you want to plug? Yes, the Psychology podcast which you've been on. November 11th, we're doing a big relaunch with Stitcher, which is a major podcast network, and we're going to take the podcast to the next level. So if you enjoy this kind of discussion, you'll probably enjoy the kinds of discussions I have on that podcast as well. Beautiful. Everyone check that out. What's your Twitter handle? SB Kaufman. Awesome. Follow Scott on Twitter and listen to Insta. Or Insta. Scott Barry Kaufman. At Scott Barry Kaufman. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. We'll try to plug those handles in the description. Other than that, thank you, Scott, for being an excellent guest, a conversation partner, and coming on the Heart Speaks podcast with yours truly. Thank you. Loved it.